If wealth is the inevitable outcome of both hard work and enterprise, then every woman in Africa should be a dollar billionaire.
In Boston and Massachusetts, you have the largest number of small and medium-sized enterprises arising from research done within those institutions.
Wow. I think in institutions of higher learning, this is where we need to interrogate these things. To say, how is it possible that 80% of the cobalt that is needed by the world to produce electric vehicles and batteries come from one country?
There are very positive attributes in South Africa, and I don't want us, in our awareness of our problems, to define ourselves as totally incompetent and not having performed for 30 years.
We as leaders, can we create holding spaces where our people can just participate?
Good evening and welcome to this special broadcast, and thanks for your patience. It's an honor really to be a part of an event of this kind and to be amongst people whom I respect dearly. I cannot even believe it. I pinch myself that I'm sitting next to you, and I'm at a university. As someone who recently completed his master's in business, I am a fan of academics. But then again, I have questions about their role in society as a whole. And that's probably why we're here. Good evening and welcome to this conversation. I think introductions have been done and time is of the essence. I will move straight to it if we're okay with that. Prof, you and I hung out for a podcast once, and we had a heartwarming conversation about Africa and its challenges, and South Africa and its challenges. Part of my delays today was because of the roads. No excuse. It's a challenge that we face in this country. And I wonder, as a university like this one, University of the Free State, speaks of big global ambitions, speak of Vision 130, which speaks of innovation and global impact. But we have small challenges in this country. We have basic challenges in this country. It's easy for one to think of big ambitions, but yet we're dealing with some of the most pressing everyday issues. How does a university of this kind, with these big global ambitions, balance the big dream and achieving the small everyday problems that we have, that you and I know so well?
So if this is your country, where are your stories? And what are your whispers? This is the title of Professor J. Edwards Chamberlain's first book, where he was seeking the middle ground. He's an emeritus professor of English and comparative literature at the University of Toronto. More than 60 years of Africa's freedom. Where are our stories? Because if we don't tell our stories, other people might tell them in a manner that we do not like. Which means if we don't think for ourselves, we place our future in the hands of others. It is up to us to create our own new world. Put differently, if wealth is the inevitable outcome of both hard work and enterprise, then every woman in Africa should be a dollar billionaire.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing? As South Africa, the hope, the crucible of trying to reclaim our self-respect and self-worth, that poverty still has primarily a black and feminine face. And yet Africa is not a poor continent, just poorly managed, not even poorly led, because leadership presupposes followership. Leadership actually is not self, but the other-centered. Let me end maybe by saying the problems of South Africa, which was the hope of the continent when we became free, we walked tall. In multilateral institutions, they would say that South Africans are here because we had offered something that in the rest of the continent they didn't have. And yet 31 years into democracy, I think we have succumbed primarily to greed, which then precipitated state capture, and then bribery, stealing, and cheating. So when you do that, you forget why people died, why they went to struggle, why communities were exterminated, why in the frontline states the apartheid government would feel emboldened to fly over at night in Botswana, Lesotho, and Eswatini and exterminate entire communities. And that was primarily just for two things. Number one, to improve the quality of lives of the majority of our people on the one hand, and on the other, to have a better life for all, not just for elected officials. Today, when you look at the metrics, it says we've reclaimed our number one spot as the biggest economy in Africa. 1.4 billion people, 54 African countries, if you include Sub-Sahara. We speak 3,000 languages, continental GDP of $4.36 trillion US dollars. But South Africa is number one with $400 billion US dollars. It was the same in 2016. So in real terms, it means we have all gone backwards because our discretionary purchasing power and disposable income buys us less today compared to the same period last year. So we can't even talk about the primary job of those who call themselves our leaders, which is just to provide service delivery, because we have become obsessed with me, myself, I, not them.
Wow. Me, myself, I. We learn it from somewhere. We get it from somewhere. Maybe we observe it from our leaders. Maybe that's where we see it. Dr. Pandor, I want to ask you about African universities and the role that universities can play to influence what happens in the world, or are they relegated to being just depositories of knowledge and nothing else happens beyond that? How can universities play a role?
Well, to answer your question, and good evening to everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. Universities play their best role in a context in which there's freedom of expression, democracy, and free academic activity. If you don't have those qualities in a society, it's impossible for higher education to make a contribution to development. In South Africa, we do have them, but I think we have not managed to fully harness the role that universities can play in developing communities, in supporting the very essence that you referred to at the beginning, supporting development. Now, if you look at a recent publication, a book published by Professor Brink, a former Vice-Chancellor of the University of Stellenbosch, he did incredible research looking at universities on the continent, but in other regions of the world as well, and looking specifically at the degree to which they had refined this service notion of universities, which is the link to community. Because remember, when we speak of universities, it's teaching, research, community outreach. And he identified several institutions across the world that have really developed an incredible ability to be responsive to local problems and to ensure that community responses are an integral part of all academic research and innovation work. So that's one interesting example. The other is a book written by the first Vice-Chancellor of Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Now, many people don't know that essentially the city of Boston survives because of the research of universities, and especially MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And in MIT, the largest proportion of academic and research staff are engineers. And what do they devote their energies to? Innovation. So what they have done through that focus is in Boston and Massachusetts, you have the largest number of small and medium-sized enterprises arising from research done within those institutions.
Wow.
So you can, through university work, make a contribution to development. Yeah. But it has to be an integral part of the university enterprise and must enjoy that characteristic I referred to: freedom of expression, freedom to research, freedom to pursue knowledge, and support for innovation. So that comes by ensuring that you link researchers, that government is linked in, but also the private sector plays a role. In South Africa, government is a major supporter of higher education, the private sector less. Recently, I spoke to donors of many non-governmental organizations in our country, and I asked them how many of them are picking up the slack caused by President Trump's withdrawal of funding for HIV in South Africa, but broadly throughout the world. And I suspect very few of them are. Now, you have an institute like Caprisa at University of KwaZulu-Natal doing amazing work on HIV and AIDS. It's going to close down. Why is our private sector not picking that up? So we've got to address the inadequacies that there are in establishing this link that assists you to arrive at a point where innovation makes an impact. But if you have fits, stops and starts, and there are inadequacies of resourcing or capacity support, then the work that academics do doesn't actually come to full fruition. And I think this is something we must address on the African continent. I must say with South Africa, we're a bit better at it now, but on major parts of the continent, there's still a significant gap. Our governments don't recognize that the public sector has an important role in higher education, and they've left it somewhat to the existence of one or two public institutions, and then largely private institutions of higher education whose primary academic focus is business studies and administration. That doesn't support the kind of innovation and development I'm talking about.
Prof, you're a business leader. You've played a role in business in many ways, from Shell and many other companies. And I'm curious to know, what seems to be the challenges when it comes to business on its own, without necessarily seeing being propelled, being pushed to do it? What seems to be the reason why business doesn't see the need to play a role in the problems of this country, and particularly in academia?
Because unfortunately, business has succumbed to measuring itself in quarterly cycles, whereas nations are created in centuries. And as a direct result of that, business does not really internalize why it's called a political economy. And it's called a political economy because it doesn't matter what you do, government has a disproportionate influence in what we do. If they don't create conducive an environment where business can thrive, then people become opportunistic and self-centered and egocentric. Yeah. Business itself has been extremely active in agitating and orchestrating for state capture. It wasn't just government. In fact, the people who taught our leaders who came from exile about the possibility that they themselves can be better looked after was business.
Yeah.
Not because our leaders were inherently corrupt. And it manifests in two ways. So the first is where government has failed in providing public services, especially in education, in security, in health. It has spawned very successful, big, white businesses. We didn't even seize the opportunity to say maybe we can create and therefore redirect the resources to the people whose job it is to improve their quality of life. So that's the first. The second is because business does not see its role in creating sustainable entities in the short term to build this notion of long-term resilience. And this, for me, was captured by the maker of Model T Ford, when he said we need to build cars that even our own people can be able to afford. How many businesses create products and services that their own employees
Can afford.
can afford? Because that's how you stimulate the economy. So the 65 million of us, Edward Kieswetter collects, on average, last 10 years, 1.4 trillion South African rands, mostly from businesses and individuals. You divide that by the 65 million South Africans, there's no reason why anybody should go to bed hungry. Yeah. The last 3 years, he has banked 2 trillion rands. So you can see, again, we're not a poor continent. The last one, I think in institutions of higher learning, this is where we need to interrogate these things. To say, how is it possible that 80% of the cobalt that is needed by the world to produce electric vehicles and batteries come from one country, the Democratic Republic of Congo? 80%. In fact, I digress. The DRC has the richest minerals under its soil in the world. And yet its people
are the poorest in Africa.
Absolutely. Not only the poorest, are the most displaced. And we allow ourselves to be used for the people who have these interests to drive these wars for as long as they want. So in Mozambique, in the north, those that were interested in oil, they kept the war going. And they said, you can worry about the minerals in the south. It took 30 years before they were satisfied and then said, okay, who do you want? John Azavimbi, we can tell you where he is. And that's how the war ended. Because you see, as I end, we forget that it's in these institutions where we need to teach our students to say the duration of oppression is never determined by the oppressor, but always by the oppressed.
Yeah, that's true. Wow. You can clap if you want. Dr. Pando, you've been a minister of many departments, from Home Affairs to, you probably don't even remember, she was Minister of Home Affairs at some point, to very recently, Department of International Relations. We can date back to higher education, to science and technology, and so forth. You know how government works, probably better than all of us in this room. You know the challenges that it faces. Earlier, a prof spoke about me, myself, and I being a problem that we have. From the perspective of average, everyday South Africans, government officials always seem like they are the representative of that statement of a me, myself, and I. How can institutions such as this, as academic institution, play a role in trying to change the state of mind that speaks of individual enrichment, that speaks of corruption, because it's entrenched in our system, and we blame it for all our problems, even if it's not true. You find a government department that charges you a bribe to do a job that they're supposed to be doing themselves. You find a legal office in the Eastern Cape where you're charged, a lawyer is charged 1,600 rand so they can expedite their case. We shouldn't be existing in an environment like that. From someone that has served us as a government official for so long, how can we bring the two together where universities play a role in trying to change the mindset of those that work in government?
I think that universities should understand that they have a political orientation that they need to build in our young people. that we need a different consciousness of ourselves, because oppression does affect people into believing that we are not capable, that we cannot achieve. And so you don't become performance-oriented. And what sometimes happens is you focus so much on what the problem is and rather inadequately on what the solution might be. So I do think we need to develop a self-confidence and say that we are able to solve our problems, that we can make a difference, that within us we have the capacity. What we need to do is work hard, learn, and execute. And I think we should be very careful about always defining ourselves as inadequate. There are very positive attributes in South Africa, and I don't want us, in our awareness of our problems, to define ourselves as totally incompetent and not having performed for 30 years. I think that's part of this rejection of the notion that blacks can advance. And you then appropriate the notion, because once you believe you are inadequate, you are prepared to allow someone else to take up a position of leadership in your stead. So I think we need to begin to believe in ourselves and start to say, actually, it's incredible that every day in South Africa, 12 million children go to school. That now, in 30 years, we have over 1 million young people in higher education. I don't know any democracy that achieved that in 30 years. And I challenge you to study history. It's not perfect, and I would not lie and say it's perfect. It's not. But it is not so terrible as to be without the opportunity for us to alter it to be better. Yeah. I also reject the notion that every person in public service is corrupt. I've never taken 1 penny of public money. And so I do believe as students of language, let us learn to say some. Yes. Because there are some who are corrupt, and there are many who every day are doing what they should. Some doing it under the most horrendous conditions, but being totally dedicated to the task. So let's have an appreciation as well. And don't forget that if I'm speaking in Canada as the private sector about making a contribution, it is because it's me, the Canadian, talking about my country. In South Africa, we've still got to win the economic prize. We've still got to have the majority economically involved in managing the higher rungs of industry and our economy. We don't control it yet, so it won't act in our favor, but we must have an awareness. Part of our task, part of the role of our universities is to train us in economics, in investment, in business formation, and in ensuring that we create a powerful rung of young people that can effectively manage our economy and ensure that we succeed. So universities have an important role. I think in research, I think government needs to become more comfortable at asking difficult questions of itself, at saying, why are we not succeeding? What is the actual problem? How do we fix it? And that's where universities come in. And you use your intellectual capacity to solve the problems that you have. I think there's an inadequacy of that in our country because all of us like to put ourselves in boxes and so distinguish ourselves. So I think what we need is patriotic fervor. We need the sense that we are South Africans, and together, in our different rungs, we're going to make the difference to our country. There's no use being able to comment and look over the parapet. You're a problem, you are this, you are that. It doesn't solve the problem. But we can say, together, we want this to be the best country in the world, and whatever I do every day, I'll be making a contribution that is positive. And that is possible, I know it.
Wow, well said. I want to segue very nicely I want to segue from those principles that you're raising to the book, your bestseller, Prof, Lift as We Rise. It speaks to all of us. It says to all of us, what are we doing in our own small corners to change our environment? Those principles, they will last for hundreds of years. Are we living up to that as South Africans? And if we're not, what can we learn from your book that can help all of us to do the best we can to change this country?
So first, we see many pockets of these because we ourselves are products of people who have lifted us up. We see that because when you look at some of the best institutions that we have, like the South African Revenue Service, was created post 27th of April 1994 from 4 separate departments of finance, expenditure, and it became one of the top 5 revenue collection agencies in the world. But I bring it back to the university because we just happen to be in an institution of higher learning. And to be explicit about what we are trying to do at the University of the Free State so that we bring about the type of products that can have a full appreciation that I can, we can. But there's a problem when one says only I can. Mm-hmm. And here what we're trying to do first and foremost is to bring about an inclusive academic excellence. I'm choosing my words very carefully because up until now, 31 years into democracy, these institutions still don't look like us. Number 2, it's about bringing a social justice approach to these institutions of higher learning because the disparities are so grotesque that it would take us another 300 years to even speak of an equality in education. For 98% of the students who are there depend on NSFAS, not just for their tuition and accommodation, but also for their subsistence. Thirdly, it's about creating ethical frameworks. Because we thought that the 26 public universities that have 1.2 million students are immune from corruption in business and corruption in government. But the Vice Chancellor of Fort Hare University, that has given us 5 African presidents, walks around not with 1 security detail, but 6. Primarily because of what happens in the value chain, in the supply chain, in the procurement department.
The institution.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. The penultimate one, it's about bringing about contextual academic freedom. That's why it's Africa Day, to be able to tell our stories, because our stories are being told by others. The last one is to bring about sustainable funding models. Because as I end, I never thought that in my lifetime I'll ever see products of universities who are at the top of the food chains called doctors because they are clinicians, MBBCH. Mm-hmm. But also PhD students, graduates of these universities, would finish their studies and join the ranks of the unemployed.
Yeah.
And amplifying this notion of the working poor. Because structurally we have done nothing to change the system, the economic structure that we were gifted by Great Britain. And I'll come back to that point if we have a moment. Because if we don't do this, in these 26 public universities, there's this small problem of historical debt, which the HSRC did a piece of work, and they found that 16.5 billion is the total amount, 9.2 billion of which is irrecoverable. But the one that frightens me is that in 2022, when they did the study, 100,000 of our own nieces and nephews had finished their studies but unable to graduate because they owe these institutions a piece of a rand. And how does it manifest? You see it in mental health issues in these institutions, but you also see it in period poverty.
That is shocking reality. I want to move, because there's a number of subjects we want to touch on. Young people speak of decolonizing education. Young people today, and I say young people today because when I was at university, concepts like those did not exist. And we had other issues to deal with then. We were dealing with apartheid. And young people today are saying, we see you're teaching us stuff, but these things you're teaching us are irrelevant to us. And I want to move it to you, Dr. Pando. You've completed education at various parts of the world. Surely it informs a part of your way of thinking. And it also continues to guide your knowledge base in terms of whether such education is relevant and can it make a difference. And excuse my disrespect, you've lived a fairly long life to be able to help us here with some knowledge in that regard. There's an article I read in the Citizen last week that said some institutions should be closed down because what they're teaching is useless. And we are at that stage now where we produce unemployed graduates. Are we teaching them the wrong things? Are they wasting their parents' money and time? Are we perpetuating this never-ending cycle of poverty? With your history and your knowledge, are we learning the right things? And what do we do to try to decolonize education as Africa and as South Africans?
We're not learning the right things. And this notion of looking at what we are teaching and the graduates we're producing was very well authored by Michael Dorr in what was called the diploma disease. And he was looking primarily at Africa and at how we consistently want to produce academic graduates and we don't produce artisans. We don't produce technicians. We don't produce people in the vocational sphere. So indeed, while there's unemployment, but companies, people who know technical drawing, they need draftspersons, but we don't produce those. Companies need plumbers, electricians, carpenters, tilers, but we regard this as low-level work. And so we all want to go and do a BA. We all want to do a BSocSci, but it doesn't fit to the nature of economy that we have. So I think we do need to rethink what we're doing, and it is happening. Universities have changed. For example, the integration of technology in many of programs that are taught in our institutions and the growth in information communication technology programs is very important because this is an important area of innovation. And I think we've grown engineers and many more scientists, but we need to do more. But the key in our country and on the continent is technical and vocational education. That's where the gap is. To mine our cobalt from DRC or manganese here, we need technical people who understand surface level mining, deep level mining, who understand developing new engineering tools for mining. All of that is not really a core focal area. So I do think the degrees we offer need consideration. We've got to change our own mindset and that of our parents about what are careers that we need to focus upon. As I think the South African government, we should focus much more in investing in research because we need more full-time researchers to do that innovation work, produce these new drugs that we patent ourselves, that we manufacture in Africa, and then sell to the rest of the world. We don't even understand the diseases in Africa properly. We're not carrying out research to respond to them adequately. We haven't done the genetic mapping of ourselves as Africans. We use pharmaceutical products that are clinically tested on people that have a different genetic makeup from our own, whose context is very different from the one we live in. So there's a great deal of opportunity, but we're training for our programs and our faculties and not for the opportunities. And the turnaround in academic sphere is quite slow often. So, we really need to rethink our purpose, our focus areas, and the relationship between universities and technical and vocational colleges. Because you do need some level of articulation between institutions so that students don't feel technical and vocational is a dead end, and university students don't think that university education is kind of the prime. We need to understand all these sectors and be familiar with all of them. It's been said that the current and future generations will need multiple careers and multiple training programs. So the assumption that you begin as a teacher and will end as a teacher of maths is said to be a wrong assumption. You're going to have many different careers, and so you've got to become an astute learner who understands the environment in which we live and the opportunities available. I just want to come back to the question you posed to Professor Mohale about his book and the various features of lifting as we rise. And I want to say, I do think that as a people we could do more. And I say this from my experience of being in exile.
Yes.
I was among those first students at the very new University of Botswana, of the newly independent Botswana at that time. And you know how that university was built? The first president of Botswana, Sir Seretse Khama, went around the country saying to Botswana, "Mongwe le mongwe kgomo." Everybody contribute a cow. That's how the first classrooms were built. Today, it's a huge university. I can't believe it when I drive past it. We schooled in these prefabs or whatever. But today, it's a full academic institution. So we can make a difference. And for those young people who really don't find adequacy through NSFAS, I think if all of us could contribute 10 Rand annually and create a fund that is a people's fund for our young people, we could make a difference. Like in America, they created the Negro College Fund. And people make very small contributions, but they make a meaningful impact on young people's life opportunities. So it comes back to the thing, I'm saying, I don't particularly like those people who they call motivational speakers or something. They're not my favorite, but some of them do a good job. But really, I believe we need motivation. We need self-belief. We need a different consciousness. We need to think about ourselves differently as Black people. We need to think about excellence. We need to think we're the best, and then we'll act it out. But when you don't believe it, you can't be it. So I really think we need a push. And really being mired, in this thing, oh, woe is me, apartheid was there. Hey, we got the political thing. Let's move to the next level.
Yeah. Wow. A new mindset, young people. A new mindset. But the statement that you made earlier that I really want to touch on, I want to go back to curriculum transformation, Prof, and ask what is holding us back? You've served, in business, and you've come up the ranks as a young man. You've seen these challenges, and now you play a role in both sides. What is holding us back when it comes to curriculum transformation? If we ever win anything today, help us get to a place where we understand what could be done with transforming our curriculum. And by the way, my radio learnings help me to do this type of thing. I'm throwing forward to a question I'm going to ask both of them about Donald Trump, just so you know.
So that we're
So it's still coming.
I think,
So they prepare themselves.
I think there's been curriculum change.
Yes.
Yeah, there has been. Decolonization, really, of the curriculum and all the literature, the material we use, refers to seeing ourselves more in the intellectual product that is part of our programs. And that means we must write more. Because, we can't say decolonize the curriculum and expect somebody else to produce the books. So we've got to do the research, we've got to do the writing, we've got to write about Africa. I studied African literature when I was a first-year student at university, and it was the first time I had come across African literature. Throughout my schooling, we were dealing with literature from elsewhere. So, we can and should make a change and see ourselves in what we learn, use ourselves as the subject of innovation. I keep talking about innovation because innovation provides you with the products and services that address your particular context and condition in a new way and generate income through knowledge.
And it starts with us as leaders to have a full appreciation that our words are amplified tenfold. So if you're a government and you say, I will pay more at local government level than somebody who's a national minister, you have created a narrative. All of us will aspire to be at local government where the rubber hits the road, where the constitution finds expression. The economy is built not by how articulate we speak English, but how we are able to produce goods and products that the world needs, because if we get it right, we can name our price. Germany is a good example post the Second World War, with a new dawn. In Germany, they don't even wait for you to go to what we used to call matric, now called grade 12. They grab you at JC or standard 8, and they say, if you want to be a motor mechanic, an artisan, a millwright, an electrician, come, let's teach you how to make cars. And look at the quality of cars that they make. It's BMW and Mercedes and Porsche and Volkswagen, which is a German name for the people's car, like we had Volksgas, drawing on the notion that we must build cars that our own people can afford. You'll see that deliberately I avoided answering the question on lift as you rise, because I didn't want to feel embarrassed. But I think the notion says, we as leaders, can we create holding spaces where our people can just participate? Not to reach their fullest potential, just to reach their potential. It says, lift as you rise is an African adage. If you are a government, the best amongst us must lead with a heart of a servant. It says if you're a business must continue to do well by doing good, because doing good is good for everyone. It says if you're a business, you can't continue to be an island of prosperity in a sea of poverty. That's why America can be so arrogant, because they have 300 million consumers. South Africa is 65 million, in a continent 1.4 billion. But it's the same population as India, with one government, one regulatory regime, not 55 or 54. It's the same as China. And China is not confused. You never hear Xi Jinping standing up and rattling out 38 priorities in the State of the Nation address. They understand that their problem is only one. It's 1.4 billion people. Can we get to a stage where we say, our problem is just jobs, not triple challenge, because it's stubbornly high levels of unemployment that then create increasing levels of poverty and increasing levels of inequality. And let me just end by saying, Lift as you rise says, but nature is a wonderful metaphor for business. because nobody that is called successful today has ever reached there on their own. We all get help.
Yes.
So once you've received this help, can you play it forward? That's why rivers don't drink their own water, and the sun does not itself need the vitamin D. Trees don't eat their own fruit, and flowers don't give us this wonderful fragrance because they themselves want to smell like Fontainebleau rather than Calcutta in summer. So this African edict, that's how we have been brought up. My grandmother says, if you are going to be late, arrive at least 7 minutes early.
Wow. I apologize for being late.
It's meant to me, not you.
I want to conclude, Naledi Pando, and talk about the events of the past few months in the world. And some blame you, by the way.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed, yeah.
Some blame you. Some say you took us to that court and you were the spokesperson of that entire event, and now we find ourselves here.
Yeah.
And then some equally say, where's your voice in this noise? Because yours is a very strong voice that is not confused. It's very clear when it speaks on these issues. What is your take on, one, what happened yesterday? You know, I opened the lines on my radio show this afternoon. I asked people to give me their take. I asked it as simple as that. And we had 50-50 those that are saying great performance, and some that are saying John couldn't have said that, shouldn't have said that, and then giving props to that rich man from Stellenbosch, and all sorts. What is your take?
Well, I think that the president comported himself very well in a difficult context, because you could anticipate what was going to be tried. Where I think we should have done better is to have the factual base to challenge the misinformation, because we know it's been peddled for months now, and I feel we didn't challenge it sufficiently, but I understand why. You don't want to get into an argument in that platform, because you're being put there in order to be humiliated and embarrassed. And we all know about humiliation as South Africans. So I think it was the best that could be done at the time. And now the challenge is what happens in the back room. The work must continue, because we've got to build that relationship, rebuild it. But South Africans should not be embarrassed about having gone to the International Court of Justice. There are international frameworks of law which we, as member states of the United Nations, sign on to. And these mandate us to protect each other. They don't mandate us to sit in a corner and observe slaughter going on. Today, Palestinian people are dying of starvation. This is a shame on all of us that this can happen in the 21st century before our very eyes. We desire peace and security for Israel and for Palestine. But we can't be silent when Palestinian people are being killed. Why is it not probable for South Africa to be silent? I'm actually giving a speech on this tomorrow to young people in Pretoria. The reason is, when we were suffering under apartheid, we went all over the world and said to the world, there's this thing, it's a crime against humanity. It's apartheid. It's strangling us. Help us fight it. And the world said, we understand the moral dilemma you are in. We will join you. So today, it's the Palestinian people. And South Africans are saying, Naledu diraing. Ramaphosa o batla eng kwa. Tlogela ma Israel le ba Palestina. A ba shwe. Ke taba ya rona, rena mathata a rona. A re lebelle mathata mene le dira eng ga le ya ko bathong le re nthuseng.
Yes.
If you went to people and said nthuseng, ha ba tla ko go wena ba re nthuse, ka ke wa re nya ke a gana.
True.
O nthusitse mme ke a gana.
That is so well said. Yeah.
So I think we have a dilemma. The world is chaotic. I think the global scheme is really frightening at the moment, the global order, but something new is emerging. People are beginning to assert themselves. One of the problems that we had is that we were very much in a unipolarity. But with the current chaotic madness, you are seeing a divergence. And so it is probable, I'm not totally hopeful yet, but it is probable a countervailing force might emerge. And I think this is a moment for the global South to show its colors. I don't know whether the South will be up to the task, but this is a moment. We need a voice that is different. We need a voice that asserts all those values and principles that we crafted in the period post-Second World War up to now. They're being mowed down slowly but surely, and we will become victims if we allow a desert of the absence of values and principles. So there's a major task confronting us, and for me, the leader in reasserting moral principles and values can only be this country. Because we know struggle, we understand oppression, and we can never tolerate oppression, never.
Wow. We've run out of time. However, I would like Prof to take a bite on these issues that we're dealing with, particularly with our international relations with America and the rest of the world as South Africa. We are clearly very special, and that's why we get so much attention from the rest of the world. And maybe we should celebrate that as well.
So the gift we received from Great Britain, about the structure of our own economy, was really premised on 3 pillars. So the first was this crucible of cheap labor forever. The second was Britain to have the first right of refusal of the gold that we ourselves have mined. The third was to go and find these diamonds, but Great Britain will determine the price, hence the creation and the existence to this day of the London Sales Organization. And structurally, as South Africa, in our 31 years of democracy, we haven't shifted that. If you understand that, then it becomes easier to understand that what the President of the United States 2.0 is doing and is about has nothing to do with us. Yes, we are being punished. One, because we went to ICJ. 2, we are being punished because of our proximity to the East. But this is the United States waking up, which was the biggest economy in the world, and finding that, whoa, the cheese has moved. What do we do now? The rules were very simple. You, China and India, must be low-cost manufacturers for the goods that we need in the US of A.
Yeah.
If you misbehave, we want order from you. You, Africa, must produce the food, plant it, and the best you export so that we eat, whilst there's food insecurity in your own continent. So that if you misbehave, we don't order and then you starve. So yesterday was going to be always an asymmetric relationship. We only have 2 options. One, we could have been populist and said, you are a bloody liar, you don't know what you're talking about, and we are a sovereign state, and you know what, go to hell.
You can't tell us anything.
If we did that, we'd be denying the fact that, number one, the US of A is our 3rd biggest trading partner. 2, there's 600 USA companies here, no more than 50 in the US of A.
Yeah.
That are South African companies. 3, that we still need the US of A for trade, for access to market, for AGOA, etc., especially because we are at our weakest now. So for me, these two things, the one says, because the USA woke up and they don't like the rules, China did not play by the script. Because what China did, it simply produced the cars for the American market, the Louis Vuittons and whatever, from 8 to 5. And then the night shift would produce the same goods for their own market. They learned the IP, the systems, the processes. You see it in the automobile sector. Today you can spend 2 million rand and buy a Range Rover. You know, the people who built and designed that are now working for BAIC and the Great Wall Motors. And they produce the same car with the same features, if not better,
much cheaper,
for 600,000.
Yeah. Yes.
So the US wakes up and it says, I don't like the rules, you didn't play, I'll kick the table so that we rearrange the chessboard and we start from scratch. And it manifests in the fact that POTUS 2.0 has increased uncertainty globally. Secondly, he's hell-bent on destroying these multilateral institutions. NATO is only a poster child. 3, he is destroying the woke institutions that have given us this social democracy, like diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Because the biggest fear, you look at the 300 million plus Americans, the majority of them are no longer white. So it is possible that they'll wake up one day and vote for another Obama, which was a miracle. And they don't ever want that to happen again. Let me just conclude by saying, so I think our president under those circumstances knew that, do I condemn my people to starvation? US aid was 17% of our health budget in TB and HIV AIDS. And we don't have the means today to replace it. And I'm not even talking about TB. Some of our institutions were depending on this. We are closing departments because the money has dried up. So you say, as a president, I'm going to put my people first. Yes, I'm not going to go down on my knees and be humiliated, but I'll try and be diplomatic and say, look, we need you as much as you need us. We've got the minerals. We haven't beneficiated. Let's find a way that makes you look good and you can save face. And we want you to take over the chairmanship of G20 from us. And
we'll hand it over nicely.
Yeah, and do come in November. So I think the president was between a rock and a hard place. And at that time, I think cool heads needed to prevail. The only thing we didn't get right is that we perpetuated the optics. The optics were not good. So when we think we need business, to say business on our side and labor, and we brought all white male Afrikaners from Stellenbosch, and thereby sending a strategic conversation that says white monopoly capital still calls the tune. And that narrative, we have gone 10 steps backwards. It will take us 20 years to try and correct it. We've got our own capital. For instance, Patrice is not the only one, but we need to bring him there. And the people who really organized this and who could see are so comfortable are the people that look like them. So the 49 fake refugees, it's not meant for us. It's meant for the US of A. And that's why it has nothing to do with us. We are just collateral damage. Thank you.
That's right.
We're concluding.
That's right.
We're concluding because we've run out of time. However, I do 3-hour podcasts, if you know what I do. So I'm going to take a few more minutes and ask you guys to, if I should ask a question about academic funding and how young people will continue to be funded at school and NSFAS and all of that. Should I ask that question or we close now? All right. We're clearly facing a challenge of funding. We're clearly facing austerity measures as a country. I work for an organization that sent an email yesterday and said even coffee will not be available anymore because that's the state of our country. Clearly, that affects every facet of our nation, particularly academia. And yet we still have a very poor nation of people who cannot access education, better education, and so forth. How do we overcome that? That's my concluding question to both of you.
I think that we need a diversity of sources of support for higher education. I don't think the public purse can satisfy all the needs, and it's clear. NSFAS is over 40 billion. It's a massive contribution by our government. It's actually incredible. It's not enough. We need more. I think we need to look at what role the financial sector can play. We need different models of funding. I think fee-free was perhaps a bit of an error, because you have to pay salaries, you've got to do research, nothing really is free in life. And so I think the solution of funding the poorest was very important. But then that missing middle needs to be attended to. But I don't think the public purse can do that. So could the government, in partnership with financial sector, develop a model that is less costly? We also need to face some reality. Some of us, we are sent by our parents to Model C schools, and we pay 80,000 fees annually. Then we come to university, and the fees are 34,000, and suddenly our parents don't have money. That's dishonesty. So there's something also wrong with us that we have to address. So maybe we also need to look at parents, the school background, where the child went to school, what the fees were there, and be a bit more strict on who benefits from NSFAS. Because at the moment, I think it's a bit too loose. I think there is some dishonesty as well. And then also the funds should be used for what they're meant to be used for. We shouldn't be buying Goomba with the rental money, or having parties or what. I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a straight talker. And I know we don't always like the truth, but there is a point at which we are too material as South Africans. We like the good things in life. Alcohol, all of this, parties and so on. And I really think we need to examine ourselves, and if we're serious about certain things, we become tough about them and we do them. This is how the Chinese and those we mark for success have done things. They don't play about. They're not dishonest. In China, if you're corrupt, you go before the firing squad.
Yeah.
If you're dishonest, you're in prison. It's clear. So I think we need different models, partnership with financial institutions, clearer look at the background and incomes, and really ensuring that we are funding those who need it most. And we have efficiency in that funding institution.
Prof?
So the CSIR did this piece of work in this 2022 study. I've been involved in organized business all my life, starting with the Black Management Forum. That's where my first board position was. And we are talking to organized business and say, this is not just government's problem. Because businesses everywhere else in the world, they grow their own timber. But here's big business. You're looking at government and say, give us graduates that are work ready. Who must make them ready? For a world of ICT, of 4IR, of artificial intelligence, of ChatGPT, of the skills we don't even know. You, as business, it's your own employees. You need to put this money. So when you do the math, there is 400 companies that are listed on the JSE in 2010, now 285. I exclude the ones on Alt-X. And I exclude small, micro, medium enterprises because those are survivalist. And I look at medium-sized companies with a turnover of 300 million and above per annum. And there's 1.5 million of them. And then I look at 60 companies that hold securities in the 80 private equity firms. And I say, if we look at them, all of them, 100% of them, have some sort of a corporate social investment program. 98% of them, in their 4 focus areas, have something to do with education, early childhood development, but something. And we don't even ask them to make more money or to increase their profits, just to redirect their spend. Instead of spending it in Lonmin and in Togos and Fosloras, let them put it in a historical debt fund. That's all it is. And each company puts a measly 1 million rand per annum
into that.
In 1 year, we have wiped off the entire 16.5 billion historical debt fund. The next year, we can start from scratch and have employees that are work ready. That's what it means to be a patriotic and conscientious business. Let me end by saying, Chinua Achebe is a poet and an author. And in Perfect Igbo says, he's a fool, he who treats his own brother worse than a stranger. Because when brothers fight to the death, a stranger will inherit your father's estate. That a kindred who's made a mistake must be saved, not blamed. That anger with your own flesh and blood must only be skin deep, not bone deep. I said it's called political economy because there's a disproportionate influence on what we do. Chief Albert Lutuli says, we have the power in our own hands to change this through the political system, but says, you don't want even your worst enemy at their weakest to exclude you as part of the solution. So at what stage did we decide that MK and EFF are worse enemies than the DA?
Yeah. I'd like to say thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'm sure most of us here are pleased that we were invited to this event. You as guests, and us as really the people who are conducting this. But we have to give a round of applause to the wisdom we have in this room. Really, the education that we learned today. If we don't see it and acknowledge it now, we'll probably never get a chance to do so. Thank you. And also, to those that conceptualize this idea, you have no idea where we are, not only in technology, but in broadcasting. This is the broadcasting of today. This is how the news disseminates. This is how information gets to people through platforms such as these, through what we call podcasts. This is broadcasting, probably at a level that you'll never imagine. It reaches so far and wide, and it lasts forever and ever and ever. If we said nonsense here, rest assured, no one will ever forget because it's documented. And I want to say thank you again. I appreciate it for the invitation. I want to give our panelists really an opportunity to just say thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you very much to you for the excellent facilitation.
Thank you.
And thank you to Professor. It was such a wonderful honor to be with you and to really learn, as I always do, from you. Fantastic.
Thank you.
I think I would want us to conclude by really dipping our banners in memory of Mayor Gertrude Shope, who passed away today.
Yeah.
It's a great heroine of our country, and she's a sad loss. She lived a wonderfully long life. She was 98.
Wow.
Last time I spoke to her, she said, "Wanaka, 100 kilometers."
Yes.
Wow.
So I really feel we must express our condolences to the Shope family for their loss.
Thank you.
Thank you to the University of Free State for this opportunity.
Thank you. Where?
Harriet Tubman is a slave abolitionist. She says, I've freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves. I love Me Naka Naledi Pando with all my heart. She was my boss at the Black Management Forum. I followed her career I worship the ground that she walks on. She's one of the very few that will say, Honorable Minister, that the honorable had meaning.
Wow, thank you.